So welcome to our 4th annual Black Care Experience Conference. Woo woo!
It's uncomfortable to talk about race and racism. Thank you.
First up this morning, we're going to have Millie Kerr. Millie qualified as a social worker in Oxford in 1994 and has been practicing as a social work professional for 3 decades. So she's in this. She's a veteran, I'd say, in this. Moving into management in 2003, she worked as a team manager and children's services manager within local authority children's services, health and social care, and within the charity sector. Her career has spanned a range of disciplines from safeguarding, child protection, HIV, palliative care, child asylum, child trafficking, leaving care, specialist FGM, and safeguarding services. Millie has been working within the area of anti-racist practice and racial equality since November 2020 in Brighton and Hove. And she's now the strategic anti-racist lead business improvement for the entire service in Brighton and Hove. Am I right? Children's service, okay. So Millie is experienced in people management, mentoring, organization, project management, leadership, change management, and strategic planning. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to give a rousing welcome and a rousing round of applause for Millie Kerr, our first speaker. Woo woo!
Hello. I'm really pleased to be here this morning. Thanks very much, Judith, for that really, really great welcome. Firstly, I will actually say that I am going to be very unapologetic, I suppose is the word I would use today. But because I'm going to be unapologetic, I want people to think about these things. It's uncomfortable to talk about race and racism, so I want people to sit with the discomfort of talking about race and racism. So when we're talking about racism, we're talking about prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual or community or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is marginalized. When we're talking about culture, people often think of others, them over there, people who are black, people who are mixed heritage, people who are Asian, people who are Muslim, not themselves as white people. If they're not from this community or from this country, what can we learn about what is there, what might be a particular practice or behavior or other greeting they might use other than please and thank you? Do we even ask, or do we just expect people to assimilate into how we do things here? That's just one example, and then I get people to sometimes think about what that might look like in the different spheres of this infographic, right through to child rearing methods. And I don't like people to look at the food and dress so much, because that's an easy one. Dig deeper. But this is just something to actually think about. What does culture mean to you, and what does it mean to other people, and particularly our young people? And when we're thinking about intersecting identities and intersectionality, I like to take this a step further, I suppose, from looking at protected characteristics and from looking at what people also potentially might be using a lot in local authorities in terms of the social graces. And I like to break it down a bit more in terms of how people's intersecting identities can actually be a bigger issue in terms of causing further oppressions because of all of these different things. So for instance, I could be a black woman, I'm working class, and I could be a Christian, and I'm female. So I could experience discrimination and racism as discrimination because I'm a woman, racism because I'm black, and further discrimination because I'm working class in terms of my intersecting identities. What can compound people's experiences of discrimination, and particularly when we're thinking through our young people's lenses, is age is another example. How do we think about young people, old people, but particularly young people who are care leavers and the stereotypes that may go with that? And how do we think about people who may be further oppressed by the religion they may practice, their faith that they may believe? Have people heard the term bluish? And again, I've done a bit of research around this. This is people who identify as black Jews. It's particularly come out of America, particularly mixed heritage people who are mixed heritage and black people who are identifying as Jewish, or who are Jewish, should I say. So you get further oppression because you may be from practicing a particular faith. Further oppression because you may have a neurodiversity. And remember, there are some special education needs, additional needs, neurodiversities that can't always be seen. They're not always visible. You may also get further oppression if you identify as LGBTQ+. You may not be accepted within the white LGBTQ+ community, and you may also experience challenges within the black community in terms of people's particular views about people who identify in terms of their LGBTQ+ status. You may then also experience further oppression because you may speak English as a second language. And you may also then experience further discrimination and oppression if you are subject to immigration control. And I think what people always get confused with and mixed up with, when we're talking about immigration control, people who are here, and young people who are here in particular, as asylum seekers and separated children, are here legally. Anybody who's claimed asylum are here legally until they get a final decision on their asylum claim, and particularly if that asylum claim is negative. People get confused when we're talking about asylum and immigration, also fed to us by what the media and the government are telling us. You're here legally if you're an asylum seeker. You're here legally if you're on a resident visa. You're here legally if you've got a work permit. You're here legally if you've got a spousal visa, until they run out. So when you're thinking about someone's intersecting identity, starting with black, female, working class, these are all the other things that may be going on for people that can compound their experience of discrimination and racism. Are we looking at all of these things, or just looking at the colour of someone's skin? How do we really explore what's going on for people in terms of their lived experience and their lives if we're not looking at how all these things may impact them on their lives? And when we're thinking about adultification, there's been a lot of talk about adultification, I would argue, I suppose since 2020, just after that, because I remember around that time, after 2020, 21, 22, we got some training in the local authority I work for in my substantive post from the amazing, I love her, so I will just say she's very brilliant, Janine Davis, who runs Listen Up Research and does a lot of work around adultification. But for those people that don't know what it means, it's where black children are viewed as more adult-like, more streetwise, more grown up, and more confident, and where black girls are viewed as more sexualized when they may actually be experiencing child sexual exploitation or child sexual abuse, are viewed less vulnerable, less in need of safeguarding, and considered less at risk of extrafamilial harm, particularly when also considering contextual safeguarding. When, I read the local Children's Safeguarding Partnership review about Child Q. Do people remember Child Q? The girl that was strip searched in Hackney? Within the report, it talked about this, and it talked about Child Q in particular. And the reason I picked this out of the review was because I think there is still, whether people see it or not, a concern, and this is about Child Q, but I think there is still a concern that many, if not all, black children can be seen as a risk, opposed to being at risk and in need of safeguarding. There's still a fear, there's still a load of issues that go on for black and mixed heritage young people in particular, in terms of stop and search, in terms of school exclusions, in terms of the criminal justice system. Some of the data to back this up, I will show you in a little while. But adultification is very much a real thing. And I think Janine would say, I'll steal her words, say, well, actually, we maybe need to move from adultification and just call it what it is, racism. And I always say to people, you could have a white child who's 5'9" and a black child that's 5'9". Will they get treated the same? Particularly when we're talking about police interventions or stop and search even. I've done an activity where I've looked at white privilege, which I'm not going to look at today, and I asked people to think about, well, actually, how many times has your white child been stopped and searched? And people just, nope, never happened to my child. So this is just one example, and I always say to people, regardless of what young people look like, regardless of how tall children are, we should be treating them as children first and foremost. So in terms of examples and evidence that backs up some of what I'm saying, it's well documented that black British children from Caribbean heritage are 3 times more likely to be permanently excluded from school than their white peers. You will also see data as well that's just as high, I'm not going to touch on that today, but it's just as high in terms of Gypsy Roma traveller communities. But when you put together black, Caribbean, African and mixed heritage children, it is very, very high. I'm going to ask a question about this slide. This is a piece that came out of The Guardian. There have been first-hand accounts of how girls and young women have often excluded from education after experiencing unaddressed sexual harassment and abuse, poor mental health, and racism. If you've got black girls excluded from school, what's not happening here? What do you read there that actually is being missed? Anyone want to shout out? That's one, yes, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that. Exactly. So what's actually missing here? Black girls are being excluded, and there's lots of people that are being excluded, but particularly black and global majority young people, through unaddressed sexual harassment, abuse, poor mental health, and racism. What are we doing about that? Should we be excluding people when they're experiencing all of these things? What support should we be providing? Is there alternatives to school exclusions? What should that look like? I'm not a fan of school exclusions. I'm a big fan, and people that know me will know that I want to try and change the world, but I can't do that on my own. And I think education needs a big overhaul, personally, to think about alternatives to school exclusions, to think about how we support children with SEN and neurodiversity needs, to think about how we incorporate anti-racist practice into the education system. But these, I think, is quite explicit to see, are things that are missed and are not being dealt with. And when we're thinking about black children being seen as a threat, this is some research that was undertaken by Bernardo's recently. Black children were seen as a threat and believed that care staff often involve police unnecessarily as a disciplinary measure. This increased contact between black young people and the police heightens chances of criminalisation as a result, earlier than their white peers, care experienced or not. And these are experiences of young people that have been in residential care. And when we are thinking about the youth justice system, when I talk about all the things I talk about in terms of overrepresentation, it's all evidenced by data. The statistics show that the youth justice system is succeeding overall in fewer children coming into the system, fewer children in custody, and lower reoffending rates. But really clearly stated by Youth Justice Board Chair Keith Fraser, we are categorically failing on every count to halt the overrepresentation of black children throughout the system. As black children in England and Wales are more likely to be stopped and searched, arrested, held on remand, sentenced to custody, and go on to commit other offences within a year. When we're thinking about children with special educational needs, I've been doing a lot of reading lately. There's been some more research that have just come out, and a lot of research actually that has not often been out there before, because a lot of research, when we're talking about ACEs, when we're talking about other research about substance misuse, when we're talking about research about lots of different things, it doesn't always include people of black and mixed heritage in their cohort, or if it does, not many. Sending children of black heritage is frequently misinterpreted as purely behavioural rather than an opportunity to develop their innate abilities. This flawed perspective contributes to the misunderstandings about neurodiversity in these communities, resulting in incorrect assessments, delayed recognition, and a lack of early appropriate support. The other reason I put this other slide up, this was from a serious case review that was in Lewisham, Children's Safeguarding Partnership Review. Negative stereotypes about black children can reduce professional curiosity to explore the extent to which presenting behaviours are symptomatic of neurodiversity. Professionals must always consider how biases and assumptions about black boyhood, or children for that matter, can impact children receiving the best opportunity to thrive. The reason I also put this up is because in some instances, I spoke about neurodiversity in the research that was done in the previous slide, but I think what I want people to also think about, in terms of some of the things I'm going to also go on to, is the accumulative impact of racism, the accumulative impact of discrimination, the accumulative impact, if you think about the intersectional oppressions and examples I gave, that can not just be related to issues around special educational needs, additional needs, and SEN, but they could also be related to that accumulative impact, which causes additional issues in terms of mental health and additional issues in terms of the build-up of racial trauma. I don't have the time to go into lots of issues about racial trauma today, but the accumulative impact of racial trauma is the day in, day out, your skin looks like poo, being described as somebody, one of those animals that swings through the trees, being called the N-word. When that starts from babies right the way through to adulthood, that's trauma. And talking about acknowledging care of experienced children, loss and trauma, how often do we think about when children have to leave their family home for whatever the issues might be? There may be well-founded, valid safeguarding issues, issues of neglect, issues of child abuse, loads and loads of issues for why children and young people can't remain in their home, why young people have to go into the care system. And even if there's been abuse and there's been trauma and there's been issues, children may still love their parents. So do we think about the fact that children may experience and do experience the loss of family life and the loss of parents and what that means for them, loss of extended family and loss of connections to extended family members, loss of culture, norms and traditions, and in some instances, young people have to learn and relearn about their traditions, customs and culture and their identities. Loss of a sense of belonging, loss of confidence, impact on self-worth. How do we help care of experienced young people, our young people, to build up their confidence and sense of self-worth when that can be really knocked? Shame, dishonor, blame, and guilt, regardless of what brings young people into the care system. They may feel all of those things, and they may blame themselves for what's happened, for not being able to live with their families. And even if they don't, they may still experience a lot of these things because of what may have happened to them. How do we get young people to think about their identity, or even find their identity if they feel it's been lost or they're not sure where they belong, and particularly when we're talking about children who may be of mixed heritage, or black children for that matter, and dependent on where their placements are. I'm going to talk a bit about biracial foster placements as well. And how do we think about all the trauma as well that's been experienced and lost by separated asylum-seeking young people, and the impact of racism, discrimination and colorism within families and extended families. And I say that because even within biracial relationships and families, there could be racism experienced by young people, by other extended family members, which I'm going to talk about. I'm going to be unapologetic today and talk about, which people don't talk about, colorism. Because I think we're living in an age and living in a time where we really need to think about the impact of this, not just from the white community, but from the black communities we are living in. Black and global majority communities, we need to think about issues around light-skinned, dark-skinned young people, and how people view people who may be lighter-skinned or darker-skinned, and the impact that has on people in terms of trauma, in terms of sense of belonging, in terms of why aren't we thinking of how we can work better together. There are issues in terms of colonialism that's responsible for some of this. Colonialism and slavery and the view that being lighter skinned is better than being darker skinned. So we still have people in black communities, Asian communities, still want to bleach their skins so it's lighter. We need to think about that. We've got children in schools, and even last week I did some training to social work students, funnily enough, and one talked about how when she was younger, was the only black girl in a school of all white people, and she wanted to be white. This is still happening today. When we are thinking about biracial relationships, there are still negatives about black partners, negatives that impact on children who are mixed heritage, negatives in terms of families who may have mixed heritage children, who may have more extended white family members talking about race and not thinking it is an issue. Oh, I don't need to talk about that. My son knows what colour they are. Well, I'm afraid it does need talking about, because there are many children who are still struggling with their identity, struggling because they don't have black role models in their lives, struggling because you may have a partner that's no longer with their, well, white partner that's no longer with their black partner, and what impact that's that have on a child if they're then trying to think about their identity and their sense of belonging. So how do we work with white parents as well and white carers to think about race, to think about identity, to think about how we give children a sense of belonging? And when we're talking about biracial foster placements, and actually the reason I put HBA there, sorry, I shouldn't be using too many abbreviations, that related to honour-based abuse. Now, when we're talking about colorism, I was going to use this as an example, that not so long ago, I wasn't, but another social worker was working with two young people actually, who were care experienced. One was a black asylum-seeking young person. Another was an Asian young woman, care experienced, who was pregnant. The family had disowned the Asian girl, threatening honour-based abuse because she was going out with a black boy. We need to think about colorism within our own communities. When we're thinking about biracial foster homes, are we expecting our black children, Muslim children, asylum-seeking young people to just assimilate into those placements? What can we learn about the young people that are coming into those placements, those homes actually? So I'm trying to move away from placements actually, that are moving into these foster homes. What can we learn about those young people? How can we support the development of their culture? How can we maintain some of their customs and traditions and their culture within the homes that they are going into? And in addition to that, as I touched on earlier, what can we learn about the cultures and communities that our young people come from? How can we support their identity? And when we're thinking about black carers, we sometimes think, oh, well, it's okay, we've got a cultural match. But what does a cultural match mean? If you're placing a black child or even a Muslim child, asylum-seeking child, with somebody who's African, and Africa's big, from Kenya, from Sierra Leone, just as examples, to Jamaica, to St. Lucia, all these different places, there are slight nuances, different things. Not everybody will eat jerk chicken, rice and peas, or jollof. So there are differences, there are nuances, even when we're thinking about placing children within black foster placements, and how we're thinking about those differences. Or are we just expecting people to assimilate? We need to think about all of these things. We need to think about the impact on identity, sense of belonging, and particularly I've already given the example of children who may want to be white. How do we work with that? We've been doing a lot of work. When I gave you the first slide about what we're talking about here in terms of racism, there is that sense woven through all of our systems that upholds whiteness as better than blackness, so that even our children want to be white. We need to think about that. We need to think about how we give our care experienced young people a positive sense of self. There are issues as well, or maybe not issues, but just food for thought. People who identify as white identifying or passing. I'm moving between the two because I also worked with somebody who did not like the term white passing. They're mixed heritage and their children look white. If you saw the children, they look white. So she didn't like the word passing. But some people also describe themselves as white passing. So I think the other thing that's really important is to ask people how they choose to identify. So you will have issues of people, well, not issues, but people who identify as white identifying or white passing, and think about what that also means in terms of colorism. Another example, I was doing some training with, I won't tell you the group of people, of somebody who identified as white. By the time I'd gone through the day's training around anti-racist practice, they then began to think about their identity, because what they hadn't done, until I had finished the day's training, is really think about their identity. Because within their identity, there was Pakistani in their family, but in their extended family actually, but they were identifying as white. And they began to think about, well, actually, am I really white? Should I be thinking more about my mixed heritage? All of these things need to be thought about. There's also a pressure to conform, masking, and code switching to fit in. So as well as the assimilation element I talked about, people want to fit in. So they'll code switch, change how they behave, change how they talk to fit in. Why should we change how we talk to fit in? Why can't we be accepted for who we are as the individuals? All of this causes trauma. And it's really important that when we're thinking about colorism, we also reflect, as black people and as white people, on our own biases and stereotypes. This particular bit, I'm going to give a bit of a warning because when I've shown these slides before, I'm aware that some people have got upset and have been triggered by it. But it's really, really important that we hear the voices of our black children. So in the local authority I work in terms of my substantive post, the Strategic Anti-Racist Lead, we did some research with an organisation called Audioactive. And it's where we got children who identified as black, mixed heritage, asylum seeking, Arab Muslim, but mainly black mixed heritage young people, who lived in our city, to give a view on, and we didn't put words in their mouth, we just asked them simple questions. What is your, what support, basically, I think it was, or what support, or what are your views on the services you receive in our city, in terms of the police, in terms of social care, social workers, in terms of health, and in terms of education. And this is what some of the young people had to say. So the event was held for young people, which included rapping, singing, so kids got together. It was a way we got all the kids together, really, as well as free pizza, to hear what they had to say. I can really be me when I'm with my black friends. They get me, and I can say anything and not be worried. But when I'm with my white friends, I'm never really me, and they expect me to be one way. It's hard, trying to be me. As a young black man, we don't talk about our feelings, mainly because I don't think anyone wants to listen. I was called the N-word. This is what someone said about school. I was called the N-word every day by other kids in my school, all the way through year 10. Nothing was taken seriously by staff until my parents threatened to call Ofsted. When we report a racist incident, we should be told what action has been taken. Microaggressions, racism, and their impact on well-being and mental health should be addressed in PH-SRE lessons. Black students have few, if any, positive role models in schools who look the way that we do. There needs to be more practical subjects in college for those that are studying ESOL, that is English as a second language, which is what somebody also mentioned. We also had somebody else mention, which I didn't put on here, the feeling that there should be more support for black young people transitioning from school to college, particularly when they have SEND needs or additional needs. As a young black woman, I just try not to access healthcare at all, if I can help it, because I don't think I'll get the support I need. We want mental health workers who understand our lived experiences. We want more opportunities to talk about our race and our identities. Are we giving young people the opportunity? And even when we're giving young people the opportunity, we are hearing this day in, day out. I talk to people about data, talking about overrepresentation in school exclusions, talking about overrepresentation in terms of health inequalities, overrepresentation in school exclusions. But actually, what are we doing about all of this? I am fed up of data. I have been qualified registered social worker for 30 years, and I can say I'm hearing this. I've heard this from 30 years ago to the present day. I am very much focused now on what are we going to do about this within the services we work for, within the organisations we work for. How are we really listening and hearing what our care experienced young people have to say? Or are we seeing people through that stereotypical lens? So, to enable that to happen, we have to look at strengths. When we're thinking about young people's strengths, you may be presented with a young person who's had many challenging behaviours, who presents as having challenging behaviours, or many issues really, or may experience trauma. But actually, even the most difficult, the most problematic young person has something they enjoy doing, something that they are doing well. So, how do we think about building on those foundations? You may have a young person that likes football, you may have a young person that likes singing, you may have a young person that likes science. I don't know, lots of different things. How do you build on those foundations and not just focus on what you might be seeing in terms of the presenting behaviour or the presenting issue? Because actually thinking about those foundations and thinking about those things that are interest those other children, things that may make those young people happy in terms of interests and hobbies, could be your hook to impacting change longer term. So build on those foundations. Skin and hair care. I put skin and hair care plus because I can't lie, skin and hair care, particularly hair care, is a big issue still. The reason I kind of sigh is because, come on, in the 70s, the afro was major in fashion. Why is hair care still an issue for carers, for people, for everyone, for schools, for people, for systems, when afro was a great big fashion back in the day? And on top of that, the reason I put hair care plus is not that we need to move away from hair care, because actually our care experienced young people need to develop a sense of self, a sense of really feeling positive about themselves and how they look. And our hair is a big part of our identity. It's important. But how do we support carers, whether they be kinship carers, whether they be biracial foster carers, whether they be even parents who may be white who are not sure how to care for their children's hair? How do we enable that to happen, but then move into, well, actually, how do we enable you to support the black mixed heritage children that are in your care better when they're experiencing racism, when they're experiencing oppression? How do you have those conversations with these young people about their identities, their sense of belonging? How do you challenge that school or that service about the racism you've experienced? So that's my plus, really, in terms of moving on from not just talking about hair care, which is still important, but that's my plus. Talk to young people about their identity. Talk to young people about their experience of racism and discrimination. Support white carers and parents to have those uncomfortable conversations about race, racism and identity, and how to challenge and deal with those issues with the very children that maybe they're caring for, or very much the children that are theirs. It's important that we're growing confidence to challenge inequity and racism when encountered. And how can you do that within your organisations? How can you create safe spaces to have these uncomfortable conversations so that you're learning about how to work better with our black and care experienced young people. Also seek support from community groups, because they actually can be a real great help to you in the absence of role models that children may have. Nurture children and young people's aspirations, don't squash them. Be inquisitive about children and young people's interests and achievements, talk, listen, and hear them when they speak. How often do we give black children their flowers? This is really, really important. How often do we tell young people we care about them? Black care experience, black children full stop, black mixed heritage children, all children, but particularly our black children. How often do we give them their flowers, particularly when they're always seen through a negative lens, through a stereotype? How often do we praise? Praise builds confidence. Praise encourages children and young people to feel good about themselves. Praise enables young people to see that they can achieve their dreams and goals. Praise helps children and young people to feel that they are cared for and loved. Praise and encouragement enables children and young people to grow. How often do we really say to our black care experienced children, "You're doing really well. I love your hair today. You look beautiful. I'm really pleased with your achievements today. You're doing really well at school." The other thing I thought that's really, really important, because I don't often talk about it much, but I'm also care experienced, which I've spoken about with Judith before. And it's important, actually. People find it hard to believe. I was shy, very shy when I was little. No more am I that shy child. So do you see us? Don't just see the quiet ones, because what I think is really important, look out for the ones that present as happy and smiling too, because that happy and smiling masks a lot of things. When young people are saying, "I'm okay," they absolutely may not be okay. It's easy to see those children who are quiet and home in on those young people that are quiet. But how do we really hone in and really ask inquisitive, curious questions of those young people who are happy and smiling, or present as happy and smiling, and say they're okay? How do you dig deep? Ask questions, because they may well not be okay. Behavior is a form of communication, whether it be good or challenging. I'm moving away from the word bad. So whether it be good or challenging, behavior is a form of communication. So what is behind the behavior? I always say to people, there's always a cause for the behavior that you're seeing. If you think about the accumulative impact of trauma, the accumulative impact of racism, the accumulative impact of being excluded, the accumulative impact of being told you're not good enough, the accumulative impact of still not sure about your identity, finding yourself, all of that may impact people's behavior, as well as people's perceptions of young people who are care experienced. All behaviors you may be presented with have an underlying cause. Ask curious questions, be patient, and trust can take time to build. So don't think you may get the answers to some of the things you want answers to within 5 minutes. That will take time, particularly if there are many black people, black young carers who don't trust you, don't trust the system, don't trust social workers, don't trust police, don't trust education. I've even had a parent, should I say to me, "It doesn't matter that you're black, you're all racist, you still work for the system." So think about that. It takes time to build trust. Children, first and foremost, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. Nelson Mandela. Now, I want you to do some thinking. So, how do you feel? And what stood out for you? Generally, I always want people, because I'm very conscious that what I'm talking about is impactful. And actually, talking about how you feel enables people to learn as well about some of the things that we've spoken about. It's not just what I'm talking about, it's how does it make you feel. Put yourself in the position of being care experienced, a professional, or a carer, whatever role you may be in, sitting in this room. And what is working well and not so well within the support you provide to Black, mixed heritage and global majority young people? I want you to think about that question. And what 3 things are you going to do to improve your practice as an individual in terms of your own learning and within your organisation or service to better support and meet the needs of Black and global majority children, young people and care experienced young people?